God of War is one of my favorite games of all time. I was only 8 or 9 when I played the game for the first time. My parents had rented it for me one weekend at a Blockbuster, like the great parents they are. I had already played Age of Mythology for years at this point, and it was my favorite game. So when I started killing Hydras, Minotaurs, and Cyclops in the most gory, over-the-top ways I'd ever seen, naturally, God of War became one of my favorite games as well. I was fortunate enough to get the first and second game that holiday season.
Take this gift.
Now, when I was a kid, I never had as many games as I would have liked, and usually far less than I could stand. So I had to milk my small collection of games for everything they were worth. But I was a noob and had yet to ever tackle any game's harder difficulty settings. And as much as I like God of War, it's a linear, fairly short game with one short side mode and no multiplayer features. So I decided God of War would be the first game where I rise to the challenge and for the first time take on a game on its hardest difficulty setting. So from easy to very hard, I played the game on every difficulty setting, never looking anything up, finding every secret by myself, and slowly improving through trial and error. I exhausted the game's replay value, and truly got everything out of the game that it had to offer. Through my labors, I not only mastered my first video game, but God of War taught me to think critically about video games, and appreciate them as an art. So now, I'm gonna tell you why you should play God of War. God of War is a hack-and-slash action-adventure game that came out back in 2005. This was near the end of the PlayStation 2's life cycle, and there were plenty of other hack-and-slash action-adventure games to go around. And Devil May Cry 3, a direct, critically acclaimed competitor to God of War, came out just a month before its release date. So God of War had some tough competition, and needed to set itself apart. God of War did this by being one of the most bloody and brutal games on the market, topped off with smooth controls, easy to learn combat, an art style and graphics that hold up to this day, and an epic narrative based on Greek tragedy. God of War and Devil May Cry 3 defined the genre from that point on, overshadowing similar games that came out around the same time, and causing future hack-and-slash games to copy either Devil May Cry or God of War for years to come. During God of War, you travel to several varied environments, like the city of Athens, a desert, and Tartarus, which makes the world feel vast and like you're going on an epic quest. A large chunk of the game takes place in Pandora's Temple, which is complete with booby traps and hidden treasures, which can give that part of the game an Indiana Jones sort of vibe.
Kneels before God.
But everywhere you go, gore and excessive blood, and excessive blood, and excessive blood are commonplace. The world is in chaos and the mood is often dark and depressing, as nothing positive happens to anybody in this game. The atmosphere might even be scary and horrifying, with undead and mythological creatures that feel demonic running around, if it weren't for the fact that you were playing as Kratos, who rather than being horrified, usually is the horror, and fits right into the chaos.
The gods demand sacrifice. From all of us.
Oh, please. No. No.
And only a sword and shield would befit the newest servant of the God of War.
The gameplay is the main focus of God of War, so let's talk about that. The gameplay is primarily combat with platforming and puzzling sections in between to shake things up. While the combat is top notch, and what the game is really all about, the in-between sections and quick-time events might not be for everybody, and seeing as they are the exact same every time, whether you're playing on easy or hard, or it's your first or 10th playthrough, they don't exactly help the game's replay value.
Not again.
There's a lot of variety in the traversal mechanics in God of War. Kratos can climb ladders, swing from ropes, swim, scale walls, and of course, simply jump from one place to the next. As for puzzles, you will usually have to interact with something like a lever or a movable object. These sections accomplish what they set out to do, which is to break up combat and add immersion, and for the most part are simple, varied, and non-intrusive. The balancing sections have always made me feel a little goofy though.
Ultimate power.
The only really difficult platforming sections are in Tartarus. Hell is a platformer, go figure. The environment and combat only go together a handful of times. There are these rope and wall climbing sections which, you might call a little half-baked. But besides that, environmental interaction in combat is kinda limited. Enemies can't move around the same way Kratos can, so when you do something the AI can't, like swim or move to a different platform, it gets confused. To be fair, games still have this sort of problem 15 years later, but I think it's unfortunate when you have an area like this, with multiple levels but you only fight on one at a time, rather than moving between them while being chased by jumping Minotaur. Instead, most areas where you fight are flat ground in different shapes, with any gaps or verticalities simply being dotted with archers. You can, however, ring out enemies, and the environment still does offer up unique gameplay from time to time, like when you have to drag this cage up the slope while fighting without letting it slide back down, or this room where the floor falls away, putting the fight on a timer. The first time I played through God of War, I got stuck in a few places for a few days. Yeah, a few days.
For 3 days.
Now these are mostly symptoms of me being a young, inexperienced gamer, but I got stuck here because I didn't realize I had to interact with this lever. When the game first tells you about interacting with things, there is a white light or a button prompt telling you this is interactable, but this lever had no such indicators, so I just didn't try to pull it. And this part, I didn't realize I had to throw lightning at this man because that kind of puzzle just never comes up anywhere else in the game, and I just didn't think that was intuitive. So my point is, these sections are supposed to make you feel capable and smart, so if instead you're feeling lost and dumb, just look up what you have to do next because it's probably not obvious or you're just entirely missing something, and it will just kill your flow and immersion. Save yourself the headache and just look it up. God of War has a few collectibles which you will need to keep an eye out for. Enemies, breakable objects, and red chests will drop experience in the form of red orbs, which are used to power up your abilities. There are 2 separate items you need to upgrade your health and mana respectively. 6 Gorgon Eyes upgrades health and 6 Phoenix Feathers upgrades magic. These items appear in gray chests throughout the game. There are enough red orbs in the game to get most of the upgrades, and there are actually a lot more gray chests in the game than there are eyes and feathers to obtain. This is so you can miss some and still get max upgrades. Extra gray chests are filled with a small amount of red orbs instead. There isn't anything critical like a weapon or magic that you could miss, so there's no need to stress about the collectibles too much. The biggest thing you can miss is the Muse keys, but even those are just a health and magic upgrade, which you can get through Gorgon Eyes and Phoenix Feathers anyway. Let's get into the real meat of the game, the combat. I'd recommend playing God of War on hard mode for most experienced gamers. The control scheme is pretty standard for hack and slash games. Light attack, heavy attack, jump, block, and dodge, along with a few special abilities and magics. When the developers were designing Kratos, this is the criteria they had in mind.
Brutal, nasty, violent, antisocial, pissed off, angry, fuck you.
The blackest, most brutal.
This characterization is always felt in gameplay, whether you're opening a door or finishing a heavy combo. And there's a bunch of small details that went into making God of War's combat as brutal as possible, not just gory execution animations. The music is loud, Kratos and enemies roar at each other, and the audio feedback on every attack is punchy and satisfying. Blood flies out of enemies on every hit, and the screen slows down and shakes a little on every impact. All these details come together to make God of War a gory spectacle, and it's what makes the game so special. Not to mention the Blades of Chaos are just awesome. Individual enemies are rarely a threat in God of War, as most attacks are slow, telegraphed, and can easily be avoided. So instead you're usually up against large groups of enemies who try to overwhelm you. Enemies only use slow and telegraph attacks unless you attack them. If an enemy is blocking or has taken some damage, it will use a quick counter attack. This means that most enemies have a few moves that are slow and easy to counter, but one that can consistently open you up. Most enemies have a few variants with slightly altered attacks to keep up with player progression, but they generally do the same thing. As Kratos, you have a wide variety of ways to deal with any situation. Just remember that only a couple enemies can force you to move, so when in doubt, block it out. Enemies are smart, however, and will try to space out their attacks to catch you attacking, so try not to get into a situation like this. In addition to light and heavy attacks, Kratos has a grab, a dashing shoulder attack, a variety of special weapon attacks which are accessed by holding block and pressing a face button, along with a slight variation to his whole moveset while airborne. The most fun part of God of War is the juggling. This is when you use launchers, bounces, and long combos to keep enemies in the air and at your mercy. Staying creative with your combos is always rewarding, and juggling groups of enemies always feels awesome. So once you get to Pandora's temple, you get a secondary weapon, the Blade of Artemis. It's a cool looking weapon with unique attacks and combos, but it's flawed in several ways that make it feel like an afterthought. It does have a few niche uses though, which I think are worth remembering. First, let's talk about its issues. When using the Blades of Chaos, a last second block will result in a parry, which will stop an enemy's combo and give you a counter attack. But the Blade of Artemis has no parry, forcing you to just block for long periods of times, and sometimes it just fails to block entirely. The Blades of Chaos have a very long reach, and Kratos' dodge puts him in about max range to use them. If you dodge while wielding the Blade of Artemis, however, you will find yourself completely out of range, and forced to walk back up to continue attacking. This makes fighting Gorgons or Sirens with it suicide because you can't even get close enough to attack. It also doesn't gain any new attacks when upgraded, just damage. The Blade of Artemis can't even break enemy shields, not even with the most powerful sword attack, so you're forced to use the Blades of Chaos to at least break them. It doesn't even get a new moveset when you use Rage of the Gods, and instead of a grab, you get a third attack button, which makes the purpose of each button unclear and makes the moveset feel redundant. All these issues make the weapon feel like an afterthought, though it does have a few uses which are worth remembering. It's great against undead soldiers because it stun locks them just by spamming square. It's great at destroying frozen enemies, and it has this cool effect on its block triangle, where if you hit an enemy that's already airborne, it seems to do a super launch. So look out for places to get easy ring outs. But that's where its usefulness ends, so unless you think it's just fun to use, I'd recommend avoiding this weapon. Kratos has 4 different magic attacks and a rage form which are unlocked throughout the game. First is the Rage of Poseidon, which is unlocked during the first level, and is an excellent get out of jail free card as it makes Kratos invincible and does a lot of AoE damage. The Head of Medusa is unlocked in the second level, and it's used to freeze enemies, making them easy to kill. Zeus's Fury is unlocked during the third level, and serves as a ranged attack. Then there's the Army of Hades, which, similar to the Rage of Poseidon, just wrecks everything in the room. Kratos' rage form is called Rage of the Gods. This form unfortunately charges up very slowly, making it almost always feel like a waste to use, because you can't use it for several fights afterwards, unlike in Devil May Cry where the rage form charges very fast and can be used multiple times per fight. Still, it looks awesome and has some very cool attacks.
Is that the best you can do?
How much you can use your magic ability is limited by your mana, which can make it tempting to conserve resources. But there are plenty of chests lying around, so this is rarely an issue. Every time you see a mythological creature, you could probably use a magic attack to trivialize an otherwise difficult fight. So don't be like I was when I first started playing this game. Cast your magics often, and don't underestimate any of them.
I have taught you many ways to kill a mortal, Kratos. Flesh that burns, bones that break. But to break a man's spirit is to truly destroy him.
There is an unfortunate lack of boss fights in God of War. Only 3, with 2 of them being cinematic set-piece style bosses that consist of standing in one spot, dodging a few obvious attacks, and hitting in between. They look cool and have nice death animations, but aren't very interesting gameplay-wise. And then there's the final boss, Ares, who is more like a proper boss. He has a variety of attacks, actually moves, and goes toe-to-toe with the player. He has 2 phases and an in-between fight. The first phase just puts you against Ares in a fair fight, and this is the best part of this boss fight. You get to duel Ares while making use of the fight mechanics you've learned during the game up to this point, blocking Ares' axe and hammer attacks while countering with your blades. It's a good final boss fight.
The best you can do.
Then there's the in-between fight. In this fight, Ares puts Kratos in an illusion with god magic, and you're forced to defend his family from a bunch of doppelganger Kratos. Defending an ally in video games is not something I'm ever fond of, because the ally is usually pretty dumb and just gets itself killed.
No!
But it's even worse when your ally just has 0 self-preservation and stands still taking attacks with the smallest health bar. Playing this part on the hardest difficulty gave me video game PTSD, and I will never get this soundbite out of my head. Then there's the second phase. In the second phase, Ares takes away all of your magics and the Blades of Chaos, leaving you with an alternate version of the Blade of Artemis to duel him. Ares has a different set of attacks in this phase, and it's another solid duel style fight. The only problem is that this phase has a tug-of-war style health bar, where you both gain health when attacking and lose it from getting hit. The issue I have with this is that it makes it so if you get behind, the best way to come back is to checkpoint restart. So I think it messes up what could have been another good phase of this boss fight. All in all, Ares is a solid boss fight, and he leaves the game off with a bang. There are a few ways you can play God of War. There's a remastered version of the game, but the only difference is higher resolutions. So any disc version, PS2, PS3, or PlayStation Vita is good to play. You can buy a digital version on PS3 or PlayStation Vita, stream it on PlayStation Now to your computer or PS4, or use a PS2 or PS3 emulator. For this video, I used a PS3 emulator because it's the most convenient for recording, but it was a pain to set up and had some weird glitches I'd never seen on PS2 or PS3, so I think the best way to experience this game is on PS3 with the God of War collection, because that version has high resolution and subtitles. Just remember that regardless of the version that you play, you have to go into the options menu and turn the game to full screen for some reason. Then save while the option is enabled. Every time you open the game, it will start with the option off, but if you load the saved file, it will turn back to full screen while the game is loading. Just remember, if you make another save file, you'll have to turn the option back on. On its own, God of War is a self-contained adventure and the first of a long series. It doesn't have a whole lot of replay value, so I'd imagine most people are only going to play this game once. Maybe twice if you're a hack and slash fan and want to take on God mode. I'd recommend trying the Challenge of the Gods once you complete the main game before you set the game down. It features 10 challenges that offer up unique gameplay situations and are pretty fun. It takes about an hour and has no checkpoints, so make sure you have a solid block of time so you can do it in one sitting. And you won't need to go outside of the game for anything unless you get stuck on a puzzle. As well as an above average storyline based on Greek tragedy. God of War is a game I'd recommend to anyone, and a must play for hack and slash fans. It's a legendary game that spawned a AAA franchise and helped define a genre. It's a good quick game for anybody to play at any time. So consider God of War for your next game. And thanks for watching.